Hello everybody, welcome back to More Sins of the Father. I seem to have fixed the audio issue that I was having. I don't know why, but when I first tried to do this, the onboard microphone on my laptop didn't want to work, so I had to use a headset. And yesterday the headset decided that it didn't want to stop working properly, and it was all tinny and stuff, and the laptop's microphone's working today, so who knows how technology works. But I'm headset free and that's a good thing. So hello. We're going to get back to reading this. I can't remember exactly. Oh no, I do remember exactly where we got up to yesterday. We had discovered what was underneath the red rug in Mr. Ford's study, and Parker brought in a magical expert, Olivia from Empire, who wasn't quite sure what it was either, other than it's some sort of summoning circle, maybe, and it's very dangerous and it shouldn't be messed with, and they're going to figure it out. And we left off with basically Parker leaving Amanda and Martha and everyone alone, and Martha wasn't in a great place. She was a little bit despondent, and yeah, so we're going to see, and we're going to carry on from there, and we're up to chapter 13. Martha barely slept, the events of the evening weighing heavy on her mind. After Walsh had taken her sister to go and get some sleep, she'd wandered around the house for a long time, telling herself that she was checking the doors and windows out of habit rather than because of the cold lump of fear that had settled heavy within her stomach. Her family were in danger. She knew it with as much certainty as she knew her sister's grief-fueled assumptions were right. Mr. Ford's death was no accident. Something had killed him, something powerful enough to almost successfully cover its tracks and get away with murder, had stolen into her family's home during the night and taken the life of its patriarch, brutally robbed her sister of a father, her mother of a husband. Martha would be lying if she wasn't leaning towards one of the possibilities that Olivia had casually thrown about, even if she agreed that the kind of fiends that the pagan had described were merely scavengers who didn't have enough power to rebrand the circle in the way that it had been protectively warded. It was simply too much of a coincidence, and she didn't believe in those anymore. Trouble was coming. She could sense it in the air. Now she had to work out how she was going to protect her family from it. The sensible strategy would be to wait and see what the very capable staff of Empire could do about the power circle, but when she allowed herself to consider who her sister's investigator was, it made her all the more afraid. Even though it became clear that Michael Parker was not naive when it came to the darker and more unusual realities of living in a place like Marytown, the thought of him putting himself in the path of monsters that she knew were out there were unbearable. She couldn't risk his safety any more than she could Gale or Amanda's. Her enemies were powerful and much too brutal, and she would die a million horrific deaths before she let any more harm come to the people that she dearly loved. Nothing she'd ever done felt remotely as important as keeping them safe, but in her heart she knew that as adept as she'd become, she'd arrived in Marytown woefully unprepared. The skills that she'd developed were impressive, but she was overwhelmed. Too many of her heartstrings were being stretched, and after years of forcing herself to care only for herself, she was not sure she could handle the strain of being exposed, raw, of feeling their pain. Sitting on the cushioned stool at her mother's bedside again, she watched the widow sleep. Martha didn't like the word breakdown, but she couldn't think of another way to describe what had happened to the wonderful woman who'd given her this life. It was a period of mourning so intense that it had rendered her catatonic. But it could not be permanent. Damage could be repaired. She had to believe that the woman she adored was still buried in somewhere inside of that broken shell. There had to be a way to bring her back, but as much as it made her chest ache, Martha knew that her mother's condition could not be a priority, not after what they had found. Gale was deeply traumatized, but she was still alive, and Martha intended for it to remain that way. She would not let her mother simply slip away before she had a chance to tell her how grateful she was for everything that had gone right in her life. Martha knew what she wanted to do. She simply wasn't sure it was going to be possible. There had been a lot of complications threaded into the plan that brought her back to town, and what she needed would most likely cause more trouble than it would be worth. There was nothing but it would be worth it, There was nothing that she wouldn't do to see her mother protected from whatever danger lurked on the horizon. However, actions had consequences, and she was not so naive as to think as what she intended to do would have no payback. Whatever the consequence, it would be done. The woman that raised her would expect no less, and neither would the male that she would need to enlist the aid of. After all, he'd once done the same for her. Explicitly aware of the fallout, his actions had been swift, without mercy, the target of his wrath dead and her virtue avenged before he'd even learned her name because he thought of her worthy. And for Martha Valentine there was nobody more worthy than Gail Ford. Her mother meant everything to her. Reluctantly leaving her mother for the second time that evening, she crept back along the hallway and into her old room, stopping only briefly enough for her to grab something that she would almost certainly need from her pack before retrieving her jacket, boots, and heading out through the ground floor, through the kitchen and out of the back door, which she'd snagged a key for. The garden was perfectly preened, a testament to Gail Ford's indomitable green fingers, which had stayed vibrant throughout the years since Martha had last been there. The flower beds were well maintained, full to the brim with arrangements that any florist would be proud of. Perfectly preened, the lawn was long and narrow, lush but not overgrown. It was damp beneath Martha's boots, leaving soft imprints in the grass as she crossed over it, heading past the small garden pond for the high perimeter fence. Once she reached the end of the garden, she fixed a black leather sheath that held her prized dagger to her belt at the small of her back, and skillfully propelled herself up over and into the alleyway that ran behind the Ford property line. A brisk stroll through Marytown was thankfully uneventful. Martha stuck to the narrow back streets, minimalising the possibility of coming into contact with anyone. It wasn't difficult. So late at night, the streets were deserted, the residents of the allegedly serene, quaint town tucked up safely in their beds and their homes. Martha envied them. She was so far away from home, even further from her own bed, and she doubted she'd ever feel safe again unless her family was protected from the monsters that plagued their world. It took less than 20 minutes for her to reach the surrounding hills. In the light of day, Martha recalled them as being wonderful, a rambler's dream. She'd spent a long time in these woods, but it was a memory of the last time that she was here that was the freshest in her mind, after she was rescued from the fiends that had stolen so much of her life away from her. It had been a little bit later than this, just before dawn. She had not been alone, but she had been afraid. No monsters like the ones that had taken her waited for them. It was that morning, as the sun rose like a resplendent fan of illuminating colour over the horizon, that she was shown how fragile the balance of power and peace that kept the residents of Marytown safe truly was. How easily it could fall apart into chaos and terrible destruction, and why it was impossible for her to ever go back home, claim the life that she once had, the life that was stolen from her. Marytown was surrounded on every possible flank, and its evil vanguards watched and waited for males like the one at her side to turn and breach the boundary that separated their posts from the town below. For then they'd have an excuse that they'd been waiting for, so their masters could claim the cursed lands for themselves, enslave all who would be enslaved, murder those who refused. The only thing stopping them was a centuries-old agreement known as the Pact, an agreement that Martha was again planning to stealthily circumvent. After all, it had been done before, and she was hoping that it could be done again. The meeting point was tucked away into the hillside on a curling, narrow road. The white-walled building was 2 stories tall, with decorative Tudor-like black edging to make it appear older than it was. An expansive gravel car park lay adjacent, a testament to the public house's popularity. In the depths of the night it was closed for business, but that didn't matter. A friend had not picked out the location because he enjoyed the taste of its brews and bar snacks, and Martha had never been the sociable type. They'd chosen it because it was strategically important, not because it was a local bar. She couldn't see the male that she was seeking from the road, but that didn't surprise her. Stephen North wouldn't want to be spotted loitering around a public building after dark, and he was not exactly an easy man to miss. Doing a full circle, she scanned the area and still couldn't figure out where he could be hiding, which made her chest immediately start to tighten. So close to the border, there was an ugly possibility that he could be targeted for sport by the Vanguard demons that she'd once feared so badly. She didn't know the Vanguards felt any lasting loyalty to their dead, but if they did, they'd surely love to get their hands on the warrior who'd decimated so many of their ilk and gotten away with it, because as far as anybody of note was concerned, they had struck the first blow when they took her, and everybody wanted to avoid another bloody battle fought on these lands. And so it had been for decades. Worrying about him was ridiculous. Martha knew that Stephen could more than handle himself and didn't care if any lesser enemies came after him. Thinning the herd could work in their favour, create an opening for them to exploit, if they were careful about it. Martha. She turned around facing the woodland opposite the pub and felt an instant rush of relief that left her momentarily feeling rather exhausted. It had been a very long night, and it was far from over, and while Martha knew she couldn't collapse into a heap any time soon, she allowed herself a moment to breathe before finally crossing the road and going to one of the most influential people that she had in her life. If Gail Ford had laid the foundations of the woman that her daughter was destined to become, and Stephen North had become the keystone that, once she allowed herself to be rebuilt, held her pieces together. She hadn't made it so far by herself. She could never find the sentiment to express her gratitude, but it was more than that. Martha had grown to admire the simplicity of his detached, professional way and the unique existence that they shared, because it had enabled her not only recover in safety and regain her strength, but to develop in her way while he watched her back and committed himself to a life as her pragmatic protector. Taller and more muscular than any human male she'd ever met, Stephen had always cut an impressive figure, and this night was no exception. As he stood against the backdrop of windswept darkness and trees, so many trees, woodland potentially filled with monsters. He was dressed for the blustery weather, his military jacket the same cut as the one that Martha wore, zippered shut over what was extremely likely to be a fitted dark t-shirt and dark khaki trousers. His deep black hair, shoulder length and wavy, was tied back into a knot, bearing a face that could have been handsome if he was not always so stern. Eyes that were diamond clear and just as sharp watched her as she approached. Martha knew that they were inherited from his father and singled him out as one of the most exalted of his brethren, but now and then they were capable of genuine warmth that was unbecoming to his status as a tough, unyielding warrior. Less than 12 hours, he stated as she finally reached him. I am most impressed. I expected that I'd be waiting for days. I wish that I could tell you that it was as simple as that, but I can't stay for long, she sadly informed him. The situation here is worse than I thought, and I'm afraid that I need your help. He stared at her for a disconcertingly long time before sighing in what, to Martha, felt a lot like frustration, and then he turned from her, muttering a commanding, "Walk with me." Not knowing what else she could do, she followed him into the tree line. As uncomfortable as this encounter was likely to get, she didn't feel as apprehensive now that she was back in his presence. They were about as safe as they were going to be while they were able to watch each other's backs. None of their enemies in the area would be foolish enough to engage both of them. If they were being watched, it was more likely they would merely be observed until they made a move considered worth doing something about, which Martha hoped would be sooner rather than later. Talk to me, Stephen urged, as they finally reached a small clearing in the trees. He'd seemingly been waiting there for a while, judging by the track marks in the sodden leaves on the ground, waiting and pacing, back and forth, a hell of a lot, which was surprising to see. My mother's husband is dead. He hesitated, as if taken aback. My condolences. I couldn't care less about what happened to him, Martha stated with brutal honesty. However, my sister's a mess and my mother's catatonic, and now I believe they may be in danger. And there's very little that I can do about it without letting everybody know who I am and what I do, and this is all just such a mess. Martha. Stephen's steady voice made her focus, look at him. She held his eyes, used them to steady herself, calm her breathing and her racing heart down to a level that would prevent a panic that seemed to have risen from within her. When it seemed like she was ready, he instructed, slow down, tell me why you think they're in danger. Moistening her mouth, she did exactly that, including the Empire investigation, the discovery of the strange power circle in Mr. Ford's study and everything that it implied, adding, I don't know for certain that he summoned what I think he did, but I can't take that risk. Not while that circle is inside of that house. Not with the safety of my family, and certainly not with the life of my mother. Stephen deduced. You believe that our enemies may harm them. This is going to get as bad as it could. I'm confident in my ability to assess the situation and deal with it accordingly. But being here with all my personal history, I can't give everybody that I care about my undivided attention. I can't protect them all by myself. Amanda's stubborn. She won't leave town or that house until she has answers about her father's death, and I would never make her. I know that if I need to, I can keep her safe, and she has people in her life who I'm confident can if I'm not able to. But my mother, she swallowed hard. My mother is weakened, and she's vulnerable. And that vulnerability makes her a target, he agreed, with her assessment. You believe her to be a weakness, a way a corrupting force might infiltrate your family's home and do more damage. It's what I would do. What exactly are you expecting me to do about this? He asked her very bluntly. I cannot be at your side because of the pact. My presence in that place would not go as unnoticed as yours. I would only paint a greater target upon you or your mother. I don't want you to be her bodyguard or mine, Martha explained her plan. I want you to get her the hell out of here. I don't want her in Marytown anymore, Stefan. I want her safe. At least until I know for absolute certain that she's not going to be made into a target because of something stupid that her husband did before he died. He stared at her, hard, serious. You realise what you're asking? I know. And I normally wouldn't dare dream to make such a decision on her behalf, but she's my mother, Stefan. I don't care what they think about me back at the Mount. I don't care if they want to reject me because I wasn't born there or raised there, or because my father once left me behind. She's my mother. She deserves protection. I understand that. You know that I do. But unless you plan on bringing her across the border to me, putting her in significant danger in the process, I simply cannot help you get her to safety. Yes, you can, she argued. I'm going to give you an opening to go to my family's house, get her, and then get the hell out of here. An opening? The look that crossed his brow was somewhere between confused and disappointed. What are you talking about? You'll know when I do it, she replied enigmatically, not wanting to give him cause to stop or talk her out of it. Please, Stefan, you know that I would never ask you to do something reckless and ill-planned. I've thought this through. It can work, and maybe the only chance my mother has to get somewhere safe while she can. In a move that surprised her, he raised a gloved hand and brushed a wayward wave of hair from near her left eye, tucked it behind her ear. The touch appeared intimate, but as with any physical contact that ever happened between the two of them, it was fleeting and focused, deliberate. They rarely touched, and never in an intimate manner. It was not what their relationship was about. You're letting your emotions overwhelm you, he observed, something akin to sadness in his tone. You're exhausted. It's not like that, she shook her head. It's different here. You are different here. No, I'm not, she retorted. The quickness of his surety made her hesitate. Stop for a moment and think about what she was asking. Once she was certain in her mind, she did her best to explain. Things are raw at the moment, which is understandable. My family are grieving and they haven't seen me for over a decade. There are a lot of personal feelings being aired, and every one of them is justified. I hurt these people. I never meant to, but I did, and I owe them for that, whatever the personal cost. I owe them the chance and the right to tell me how shitty I treated them by not coming back sooner. It's hard, but I can take it, and I will not bury my humanity because it displeases you, Stefan. Not here, not now. Martha, he looked taken aback, slightly wounded. I would never suggest that you should bury your humanity. I simply worry about you when you struggle like this. I want what's best for you. You know that I've never cared about you being human-born. She let out a noise of sheer disgust. I hate that word. As you should, he concurred, with a nod of his head. You're a lot less human now than you've ever been, and you deserve to be acknowledged for those achievements. This is not about that. Martha was not at all convinced about anything he'd stated. Right then she felt exhausted, afraid, and very human. Her shoulders dropped and she looked down at her feet, pouting softly about everything and nothing in particular. Stefan would most likely judge that to be a sign of weakness, but she couldn't make herself care or lift her head and look at him. She hated all of this. The lingering stretch of silence was brimming with unhappiness, and Martha wasn't convinced that all of it belonged to her. Stefan, usually so naturally controlled in his disposition, seemed to be lacking his calculated levels of stoicism. The evidence of his previous painting could attest to such, and Martha felt guilty that she was coming to him with her demands when the location was probably as difficult for him to be back in as it was for her. She felt the tug of the bond that had formed between them, a deep-rooted desire to make him proud. She knew that she could be stubborn even at the best of times, and that her tenacity simultaneously irked him as much as it was a quality that he admired. They had clashed before, over personal differences, moral stances, and their various opinions, and most of the time it was her that ultimately relented, because she knew that he was much more experienced, much less impulsive, and ultimately her mentor, her better. But not this time, not over this. She was going to make sure that her family was safe, with or without him. With an air of resignation, Stefan said, "Explain your plan." Hang on. Have a cup of tea? Or a drink from my cup of tea. We are going to continue. Chapter 14. The day that she was taken, Martha packed a bag. It was not for the reason that the police apparently later deduced or that Parker had angrily accused her of, but because she decided on something that she'd been mulling over in her head for a very long time. In a roundabout way, they'd been right. She'd been leaving. Not Marytown, only her parents' home. It had been time. She could no longer justify staying there, beholden to a person who hated and only wanted to cause her harm, and had desperately needed to stop putting her own needs first, and be where she wanted to be. Unfortunately, she'd never reached her destination, a small walk across town abruptly ending in a way that she could never have imagined mere minutes after it began. Fate had other plans for her. Martha only had vague memories of her abduction, the horrors that followed, stealing any true sense of recognition from her mind about that day. Since that extended period of abuse, she taught herself how to compartmentalize her recollections of that time. It was the only way she could continue to survive and move past what happened. Now, many years had passed, and in many ways she'd moved on. However, stepping back through the gates into Marytown Park, she felt like she was 17 years old again, about to embark upon a much-needed chapter of her life, on a bright summer's day that changed her world forever. Time simply melted away. Forcing the feeling down, Martha drew in a deep, shaking breath, adrenaline making her shaky to her very core as it tried to coax her into a fight-or-flight response that was understandable. It was as if her body knew that it was not simply bad memories that she was about to face, and it didn't like her plan any more than Stefan had. However, it was not up to either of them to make it happen or not. Martha had assessed the risk and deemed them acceptable. When the only other outcomes involved her family getting hurt or worse, she could handle this. She was much stronger now. The spot where she'd been taken was pretty much right in the middle of the park. She kept her head held high as she marched towards it, not allowing herself to stop and take in her surroundings. Martha knew the park like the back of her hand, and it was extremely unlikely that it had changed. The whole of the original 130 acres of Marytown was a protected heritage site. And while a certain amount of modernisation was inevitable, it still maintained everything that had made it an attractive homestead back when it was created centuries earlier. Nothing changed, it simply flourished. It was bizarre to Martha that there was no sort of marking on the wide, flower-lined path to indicate where the most important moment of her life had occurred. It felt like there should have been, at the very least, a small plaque affixed to the crunchy gravel beneath her boots. Words along the lines of, "Here lies the innocence of Martha Ford, forever lost, never to be regained," etched into a shiny, polished silver. In reality, however, it was simply a path that many, many feet had travelled along since that day, oblivious of her history, of her pain. So extraordinary, yet horrifyingly mundane. Locations like buildings have the power to hold the remnants of the tragic past, however. Martha knew that Marytown was a prime example of this. This particular geographical spot remembered what had happened to the young, naive girl who had walked of her own volition to this point in her life. Then it was likely muddled up with a lot of other energy signatures. Martha wanted to create an opening she saw, and she knew she'd have to tap into those remnants and announce that she was back to all that would listen. And there was only one thing that she knew would bring some of the attention that she now actively sought. Reaching around to the small of her back, she unsheathed her blade, curling her hand around the decorative yet functional copper hilt. It was a perfect fit for her slender grip, having been crafted specifically for her by the male who taught her to use it. The ridges of the decorative design felt comforting, familiar, And while she was not a natural fighter, her skill set was the result of hard work and intensive training. She felt confident with her blade in her hand. This dagger had saved her life on more than one occasion, and she'd continued to wield it with pride until she could carry it no longer. The day was hopefully a long way into the future, and yet tonight was about Gail. Martha couldn't deny that it felt like one hell of an honour to finally be able to wield her blade in her mother's name. Holding her left hand out, she swiftly dragged the slightly curved blade across her palm. The sting of the cut was immediate, but painful. She had no time to flinch and feel pity for herself. Tightening her hand into a fist, she turned it and watched the pooling blood seep out and drip in the direction that gravity intended, down onto the path. It was the exact spot that she'd been standing in when she'd been grabbed by her evil, otherworldly abductor, captured, beaten. Martha would never really considered what she'd just done to be magic, but the power of the blood, but she knew the power that blood had in ritual incantations. Rather than speaking out words or chanting, she simply cast aside her defences, and for a solid 8 seconds, not only left herself open and defenceless, but cast out a recurring metaphysical beacon that would let anybody who was interested know that she was there and that she wanted attention. Come and get me if you think you're up to the task. Her blood was the key, the amplifier, for genetically it was a lot like that of the male who was waiting out there in the woods for her signal to be broadcast. She was not human, not entirely. The results were not immediate. There was no howling, no rush of an attack. Martha stood on the path and gazed around, relying upon her physical instincts rather than her psychic talents to assess the area, watch out for what she hoped was incoming. She didn't doubt that her plan was going to work, but the delay was worrying, as it could mean that rather than leaving an opening, her interceptor might send somebody else for her, or even worse, cover the gap in the border that they would leave behind. The latter outcome would be a problem. She knew that Stefan could and would exploit any opening that was created, even if it were just for a millisecond of negligence. He would not, however, attack a vanguard without provocation and risk an open fight simply to honour her wishes. That was too risky. And he was not a fool. That side of the plan was not her responsibility, though. Martha could trust that her ally would do whatever he could to help, and in the meantime she would hold up her end of the plan. She just needed an enemy to show their face in Marytown Park so that she could do what needed to be done, and the longer she was made to wait, the more frustrated she became. There wasn't time for this. Just as she was beginning to worry that her plan had failed, she sensed movement over by the stone water fountain, a boating lake in which she used to play with Amanda when they were merely children. It might have been innocent, a civilian out for a late-night stroll, but she doubted it very much. Not at that moment. Crossing the grass, she made a beeline for the pool of water. Something had taken the bait. She knew it. She still needed to keep her wits about her. Lord knows she didn't want to get ambushed. Something moved behind her. She turned swiftly, but was met with only space that made her angry. The fiend was playing games with her, and she was in no mood for it. Not tonight. Not when there was something so important at stake. Mentally, she sent out a quick call to Stefan, hoping that he was all right and on his way. She knew that his task would not be easy. He needed to find the opening in the border and get through it without being spotted, and the surrounding hills were vast, the spots in which vanguards lurked numerous. The only reason she had not taken the task herself was that Stefan was faster than her, had been doing this much longer. She'd been trained by the best and proven that she could get through the border undetected, but she was not as quick as Stefan. Her humanity tethered her to the mortal plane. If her new little friend wanted to waste the time that it took for Stefan to locate and reach her playing hide and seek, then that was fine. But eventually it would have to show its face because it would want to engage her, and it needed to die. There could be no physical evidence that Stefan had entered the town, and Martha was damn sure that there wouldn't be. It was the sort of self-confidence that had developed over time naturally with her training. She knew that she could fight, and fight well if she needed to. She knew that she could eliminate one cowardly and very annoying, still non-corporeal vanguard demon and covered her tracks. And she wanted to. Frustrated, she spoke. "Come out, whatever the hell you are." Fiend didn't do what it was told. Of course not, that would be too easy. Instead, a disembodied voice laughed at her, deep and far too baritone to be human, viscerally reminding her of the fiend that stole her away, making her stomach tighten hard. A haunting chant began, repeated calling her a little girl and telling her that she shouldn't be there. It was scare tactics. The fiend was trying to disorient and distract her so that when the attack happened it would catch her off guard. She wasn't going to let that happen. Her senses were sharper than ever before. Deliberately turning her back to the water fountain, towards the direction in which the voice was calling, she silently counted down the seconds, so that when the atmosphere rippled in response to the vanguard moving out from its hiding place in the ethereal plane to attack her from behind, she was prepared for it, had intentionally played it that way. Training with and around males who were over twice her size, Martha had developed a series of self-defense moves and techniques that complemented her size and the likely much larger frames of her enemies. A strong hand came over her right shoulder, going for a chokehold similar to the way that she'd been grabbed all those years ago. This time, however, she was ready for it, grabbed on tight to the guard's forearm, pressing it down against her collarbone. Stronger than she looked, she was able to hold the male's muscular arm in place as she moved forward to attach her other hand above the elbow and quickly, in one strong and determined movement, swung her entire body around, using the joint as a hinge to get out of the hold and leave her attacker open to counterattack. She wasn't afraid to fight dirty when her foe was much bigger than her. Gripping the vanguard's shoulder, she kneed him hard, square in the groin, causing him to double forward, giving her another opening which she was happy to take. Taking her dagger back out of its sheath where she'd returned it, to keep both hands free for the inevitable fight, she leapt up, straddling the fiend's hips as if she were a child cuddling him, and sank the blade into the side of his neck, ripping it back out to expose the gaping wound and allow its tainted blood to flow freely and flow fast. The vanguard gasped, all but shoved her away, clutching at his throat, but it was never going to be enough to stop the inevitable. He was going to die, and the evil bastard knew it. The growl that escaped his blood-filling mouth was very animalistic, as he launched at Martha in a last-ditch attempt to take her down, but she was quicker, moved out of reach before he hit the ground, gurgling, gasping, dying. Martha was standing there over the corpse, breathing hard and feeling relieved that her plan had gone as well as she could have hoped for, at least on her end, when her overconfidence was proven to have been somewhat foolish. A second vanguard emerged from the ether, also attacking from behind, and this time she was not remotely prepared for it, turning only in time to be greeted by a backhanded smack across the face which sent her hurtling to the ground, tumbling over the fresh, bloody body of the fiend that she'd killed, blindsided. Once she was down, the foot went in, landing fierce, angry punches to her midsection that made her scream as she tried to twist away and get free so she could fight. But it was so relentless that she knew that there had to be more than one of them, and now that they had her down on the ground, they intended to keep her there. Feeling powerless to stop the assault, Martha resigned herself to covering her face and her head with her arms to protect them from the blows. Somewhere between the pain and the strange, happy thought that nobody was trying to abduct her this time, it made her realise that the brutality of the counterattack was most likely payback. Not for the single vanguard that she just stabbed in the throat, but the many who'd been killed all those years ago because of her. They knew exactly who she was, wouldn't have come running to her call if they didn't. Back then she might have thought that she deserved this brutal beating, but now she simply saw them as enemy combatants and swore that if she survived this, she would make it her mission to add more of their ilk to her kill list. For that was the way it worked. An assault for an assault, simple mathematics, the ruthless calculus of war. The atmosphere didn't so much ripple but violently shift, and somewhere out in the darkness there was yelling, in a commanding male voice that felt so familiar it brought a tear to Martha's eye. The kicking abruptly stopped as their attackers focused their attention on the new threat that had joined the fray, immediately and systematically, expertly engaging them in a fight that he was more than capable of winning. Martha, hurt but luckily still conscious, lowered her arms and took in the scene, mesmerised by watching her mentor in action once more. God, he was one hell of a warrior. It was incredible to witness. Stefan's hands, his arms and clothing were already splattered with the blood of their demonic enemies, and the sight was rather breathtaking. But now was not the time for admiration. Martha knew that she needed to get up, find her dagger, do something. Moving onto her hands and knees was not as difficult as it ought to have been. She'd been completely human, the assault would have killed her, or at best rendered her completely immobile. There was no doubt in her mind to that. And it was probably, as it was, she probably had some bruising to her ribs and was finding it painful to take in deep breaths that she needed to compose herself, but she managed. When she was able to sit back on her haunches, she gingerly touched her cheekbone with her fingertips, unsurprised but irritated when blood came away. Damn it. The only thing she hated more than getting injured was getting injured somewhere that she couldn't easily cover it up, pretend like it hadn't happened. Old habits and all that. Glaring at the dead body which lay beside her on the grass, she felt a little bit vindicated. The bastard's cohorts may have gotten payback on her midsection, but at least she was still breathing in the presence of Stefan, who was about done making the second wave of vanguards, of which there'd been 3, pay for daring to lay their boots on her. He'd been able to cross the border without major incident, and she felt guilty that he'd been forced to fight the moment he'd reached her. But there he was, in Marytown by her side, doing what he did best, so very exquisitely. The beating, Martha decided, was worth it. As she pushed herself to her feet, she reclaimed her dagger from the ground, ruined that she would have liked to have sunk its blade into the one that had hit her in the face, but by the time she was upright, they were all dead. None left for her. Oh well. Stefan stared at her, extremely unhappy, but he wouldn't yell, tell her that she'd been reckless, because she hadn't been watching her own back carefully enough to prevent her from getting a beat down. It was not his style. She held her hands up and out as if in surrender, and stated for the record, ambushed, which he seemed to accept, and no more was said about what had just happened. A blessed relief. If Stefan North was anything, he was pragmatic, and he'd be more than aware that the extra bodies meant extra work. Prepared to take care of the little problem himself, he instructed Martha, go to your family, I shall be with you once I've cleaned this up. She nodded obediently, but asked, how long do we have? Long enough if I work fast, he retorted sternly, allowing some of his frustration to infiltrate his tone. Go, now, Martha. I don't need you hanging around here being a distraction. Trying not to take any of his words personally, she did exactly as instructed, turning on her boot heels and heading back through the park as quick as her aching midsection would allow. When she briefly glanced over her shoulder to make sure he was all right, both Stefan and the bodies had vanished. He worked very fast indeed. I just want to point out, because it's going to bother me if I don't, in that last thing that Stefan said, I said don't, and it's do not, and it says do not in the book deliberately, and I said don't, because as I was reading it out quickly, which is wrong. Stefan does not use contractions. It's the rule. Okay, so there's 2 chapters. I actually wanted to carry on and do a third today, just to round out the scene. There's a little bit more before this little bit of action is over and done with. Just let me drink some tea, and we shall carry on. Chapter 15. Entering the house through the back door, Martha worked as quickly as she could. Getting back over to the locked gate and into the garden had been a little bit more painful than she was used to, but she'd taken it because she didn't have a choice. She'd made a conscious decision not to leave an opening, putting her family and safety and protection first. Besides, she'd gotten very good at tolerating physical pain. The first and most important thing was to get cleaned up so that she could get her mother out of the house the moment that Stefan arrived, very aware that there weren't many more hours before dawn, and if she remembered anything about her Aunt Esther, the woman would be up with the birdies. This needed to be done before that happened. Heading straight up to her old room, she quickly and efficiently stripped off her clothes and washed her arms, chest and face down in the sink. The cut on her cheek was very red, raw and painful, but it would heal quickly enough if left alone. Her rib cage was bruised, but that too would heal fast. And it wasn't like she had any intentions of taking her top off in front of anyone, so that wasn't a big deal. Could have been much worse. Martha redressed in clothing from her old wardrobe. Blue jeans, a soft white cotton t-shirt and a hooded shirt that she'd actually left behind when she packed her bag all those years ago, but now decided that she liked it. It was royal blue and black, checked with pockets on the breast like a shirt with a wide oversized hood. She'd no idea why she hadn't packed it. Probably because it had been big and baggy then. Regardless, it fit her now. Being in her own clothes felt comfortable. She was going to need all of the comfort that she could get. Sorry, messed that line up completely. By the time that Stefan had taken care of the grisly extraction of the bodies and seemingly gotten himself cleaned up, she was waiting for him at the back doorway. He swiftly entered the Ford residence, and for a breathless moment, once Martha sealed the door behind them, the two of them stood there, gazing into each other's eyes. Neither put into words that they were glad the other one had made it through, and they didn't need to. As battles went, it was a simple fray. That Martha had gotten injured was her own fault for taking too much pride in her one kill. They both knew it. Nothing else needed to be said. She's upstairs, Martha informed him, keeping to the facts of the matter at hand. The very back bedroom on the right-hand side of the long hallway. Older woman. Looks a hell of a lot like me. Stefan gazed down at her for another charged moment, sensing that she was starting to find it hard to control her emotions now that her plan had come together, and she knew that her mother was going to be protected. In his usual assertive tone, he implored, "Show me." "No," she shook her head adamantly. "I don't think that's wise." "Martha," he spoke in a voice that was soft enough to make her chest ache. "This may be the last chance that you get to see her for a while. You'll not forgive yourself if you refuse to take it." He was right. Of course he was. Pushing her emotions down as far as she could make them go, Martha turned and walked through the kitchen, the ground floor, the hall. Her mother's bedroom was at the far end of the same hallway her old bedroom was on. As they walked past it, she resisted the urge to look at the door, on the off chance Stefan might randomly decide that he wanted to see where she was staying. Those two parts of her life were separate, and he didn't have permission to enter her bedroom at the residence that they shared on the Mount, so she shouldn't expect him to want to see her personal space there. Opening the door to her mother's room, Martha was distraught to discover that the woman was in the throes of what looked like a very bad dream. Her body was contorting from side to side, face twisting in fear and so much pain. The sight made her heart leap into her throat. She knew that she should do something, but she froze, unable to move. Thankfully, for the second time that night, her companion did what she was unable to do, crossing the room and going to the suffering woman. Rather than trying to wake her, however, he simply pressed the pad of his thumb to the tightly crinkled skin between her twisting eyebrows, softly hushed her back into a calm, restful sleep. It seemed miraculous that Martha had seen him do something like that many times before. She knew it was no miracle. Stefan had his own share of weird and wonderful talents to match his formidable fighting skills. "Thank you," she gasped, in what sounded a lot like relief. "Your mother is settled," he confirmed. "But she needs to be removed from this house immediately. You are right to come to me with this. What is happening here is not all mystical, but the corrupted energy in this house is making your mother's condition worse. She cannot stay here any longer if you wish for her to recover from this at all." Martha swallowed, wiped her face. "That's what I feared." "I shall do as you asked, Martha, but I must implore you to reconsider your own position. This house is not safe for you either. You think that I should return to the Mount with you both?" He nodded bluntly. "Yes, I do." "No," she shook her head adamantly. "I'm not leaving here until I've made sure that all of my family is safe. My sister needs answers about what happened to her father and..." She hesitated, deciding not to continue with that sentence. "I need to make amends to every single person who I hurt when I decided that I was going to stay with you rather than coming home to them. I cannot do that from the Mount, and I can't keep running away from my old life. It isn't fair. I have to leave now," he said, seeming to either accept or ignore everything that she told him. She couldn't tell. As was often the case with Stefan, a very closed book. "I've been here long enough." "Then go," Martha shrugged impassively, stubbornly. He spoke her name in a tone that was equal parts frustration and concern. While he was capable of understanding her logic, it was becoming apparent how little he liked that she was in Marytown, while he couldn't be there to guide and protect her. His earlier lack of control was a testament to that fact alone. Now he was actively encouraging her to leave with him, something she hadn't anticipated. She only wished that she could give him what he wanted. Seemingly resigning himself to her choice, he stated, "Be careful." She nodded, but didn't make any promises. knowing that that would be a lie. She would do her best. That was all she could offer him. Crossing the bedroom, Martha pulled back the covers of her mother's bed, hating how fragile the woman looked in her long nightgown. Getting her bathrobe, she carefully dressed her so that she wouldn't get cold on the long journey, and then stepped back. Saying goodbye to Gail was tougher than she could have ever imagined. She wanted to say so many things, but every single one of them got caught in her throat, and in the end all she could verbalise was a heartfelt plea to her companion. Please look after her, Stephen. He nodded, and very carefully cradling the woman in his strong arms, he lifted her out of bed. Becoming aware that she was being moved, Gail Ford stared, but she didn't struggle. Her actions tightened Martha's throat and made more moisture form in her eyes, threatening to overspill, because she saw a glimpse of her mother, still there. Gail's eyelashes fluttered, opening ever so slightly to gaze up at the male who held onto her so tenderly. Her voice was raspy, but so familiar as she spoke a name that was far too heartbreaking for her daughter to hear. Gadriel? Is that you? Stephen smiled down at her, a genuine softness smoothing out his usually harsh features. No, Mrs. Ford, I am not Gadriel, but you will be seeing him shortly. I shall take you directly to him, I promise. He raised his head, met Martha's eye. She nodded, and then they were gone, and she was left all alone. In the silence, she left her mother's room, sealing the door behind her, and returned to the kitchen, where she put the kettle on, silently wiped the tears from her cheeks, and waited for dawn. Okay, so a fair bit of action in those few chapters, moving the plot forward. Martha made a decision that she wasn't happy with her mother being left in the house with that circle there, and the situation being uncertain, but knowing that there was danger. And it's clear Martha is leaning towards a certain type of danger that she doesn't particularly want everybody else to know about yet. She's trying to keep her cards very close to her chest, but the situation seems to be unravelling under her feet. Whether she can keep control of that is a different matter, but she's made a bit of a personal sacrifice and ensured that her mother, above all else, is safe. And quite an emotional moment at the end there. I'm not going to spoil things as to explain to you what Gail, or who Gail might have been referring to when she looked at Stephen. But yes, so obviously there's going to be some fallout as for what Martha's decided to do, take it upon herself to do, and we'll see what shakes of that, and whether it was the right choice, and what is the next step in making sure that her family are safe, and figuring out exactly what happened to Mr. Ford. Yeah, so thank you very much. This was a longer video than we've done the past couple of days. My throat held up quite well. I've still been a little bit poorly. I'm feeling okay today. I got some good sleep. So I'm going to play it by ear and see how we go. I think tomorrow, it's quite a short chapter. So we can break it up nice like that. Thank you, as always, for listening. I appreciate you following along. I hope that you're enjoying it. Please give me feedback. I love hearing feedback. And I will hopefully see you tomorrow, and we can carry on with Sins of the Father. Thank you.